Okay, so for those of you that don't know me, I'm Nicky Watson. Some of you do know me, and it's nice to see some friendly family faces around me. So I've worked in testing for about 20 years, worked across a number of different domains. So I worked in telecoms, investment banking, consulting, media industry. So a fairly broad range of different areas in terms of testing. Obviously I'm not Rajesh, so sorry to those of you that might be disappointed. He's somewhere back in Hong Kong. So I'm the stand-in, so if there's any negative feedback, I'm not going to take any responsibility. So what I wanted to talk about today was influencing and educating non-believers. So I think, hopefully everyone in this room is a believer, right? And we're a bit like a faith, we're like, we sort of have to, chant out loud and, make people get on our side, and, we operate in a world that is not always welcoming to us as testers, right? So what I want to talk about today is how do we influence and how do we educate the people around us, the stakeholders, etc. Because we can't just go, wading in, you must do testing. It doesn't work like that, right? I mean, I think, there was a time maybe like Y2K, for example. We could do that, right? Everyone had to do testing, they knew that. But we can't go in there and just shake people and say, you have to do it. We have to be able to say and influence and educate around what is it we do, what are we bringing to the table. So that's really what I'm going to talk about. I'm very, very passionate about testing, as I hope most of you are. I mean, that's why I do it. Obviously in America, it's the happiest job in the world. I'm not American, and I can't say I always have the happiest days in the world when we work in testing. However, obviously in America they do, so good luck to them, I say. Okay, so how do we influence and show what testing's about? What are we bringing to the table? So a lot of the time, we expect people are just going to welcome us in because it's part of the software development lifecycle. Or it might be part of a program review board. So before something goes live into production, they have to say that they've had this tested, they have to produce results, proof, etc., etc. They have to do it because it's mandatory. Well, I think the days of it being mandatory are gone, really. We can't rely on that. Or is it just because we exist? So we've all got jobs, so you have to do testing because we need to be employed and we need to, feed our families and pay the rent, right? Absolute rubbish. Absolute rubbish. So, but the one thing we don't want to do really is do the whole sleazy car salesman, right? So sometimes in the testing community, we're the stakeholders. So I'm sure a lot of you, like I have had people come in, present around testing, we can do this, whiz bang, it's all new, and bells and whistles and revolutionary. Actually, it's not revolutionary, it's just under a different label, right? Good example for me, and you might disagree, automation frameworks, right? Lovely, love that topic, automation frameworks. And we've got this one called this, and we've got this one called this, and we've got this one called this. Revolutionary. Well, actually, they're pretty much fundamentally the same, they're just labelled something different, yeah? So I sort of get sick of the whole, really, don't show me a sales deck, because actually you're probably going to turn me off before I'm there at the table, And I actually said that to someone the other day. I said, don't come in here and show me a sales deck. Not interested. Come in and talk to me, but don't show me a sales deck, with all your whiz-bang, whatever, yeah? So why do stakeholders resist testing? So why do we sometimes find it difficult to get our message across? Why are they not saying, well, you all look like nice people, welcome, come on in, sit down and test all our stuff? Doesn't really work, right? So 9 times out of 10, it's because they don't actually understand the value that testing brings. And we as testers forget that because we know it, we know our profession. But we forget that we actually have to educate people about what we do and what value we bring, and not just assume, well, they must know what testing's about, they must know what I'm bringing to the table. They don't always, right? Budget and timeline constraints. Now, this is a very, very real part of our world, and we have to accept it. We can't go in and put an estimate in for 6 months when something needs to go into production in 3. That's a fact of life these days. We cannot do that. So people are concerned about budgets and timelines, and we need to accommodate that, and we need to understand that, and we need to work with our partners to help them achieve whatever it is they are delivering. Right? We can't just be saying, well, no, we need 6 months. Sorry, give us 6 months. Because the real world doesn't work like that any longer. I think it did, maybe like 15, 16 years ago. It doesn't anymore. So sometimes bad experience with testing. So I had a conversation with somebody last night in the US who had had a bad experience with testing. And as far as they were concerned, they're just not interested. They'll do their testing themselves. They won't use testing services. They've had a bad experience. Now, we have to accept that that does happen. And my answer to that is, give us another chance, but I can't walk in here and provide miracles either. Right? So you have to be real about it. Everything's not going to be fixed tomorrow. So some people have had bad experience, and we need to find out what happened, why, what can we do to address it, but what can we do realistically to address it, not promise the earth and deliver nothing. Right? That's not going to win us any friends. So often it's seen as an overhead, obviously. Again, well, we want to put more money into development, and we need to get the system in. We don't really got much left for testing. It's seen as an overhead. It's still, I think, viewed a little bit as the poor cousin, right? But we kind of know we have to have it, so we'll just tack a little bit on if we can stretch our budget, yeah? Pressure from the business. So I've seen situations where, the business is saying, we don't have time for this, we'll do the testing, we're not interested. And sometimes that's valid, actually. So again, we have to understand the whole context of, where these messages are coming from and what the messages are. Another one is anyone can do testing, right? All of us in this room, we're not skilled, right? Pick anybody up off the street, they can do testing. Not a problem at all, right? You don't need any context-driven stuff. You don't need your models. Anyone can sit there and do testing. Easy, right? And that's still quite common, right? Oh, the developer can do testing because they're not biased, right? No problem at all. Let me test my code, And I used to say to people, if you think that your developers can do testing, it's like asking me to write code. Well, I couldn't write code to save my life, right? So why would you expect another profession to be able to do with a completely different skill set? And again, we have to educate people on what we do and what our skill sets are. That it's not just sitting down, that it is analysis, right? Big part of our profession. It is techniques. It is different things that we've learned over the years. And then another one that's fairly common, I see a lot, particularly in the global world, is a desire to retain control. So if you've got stakeholders in other parts of the world, they really want their people sitting with them. Even though, I sort of say, well, you do realise we're a global company, right? Yeah, but, if they're sort of with us, And so that happens a lot, right? They just want to keep control, so they think that then, it's not out of their sight and they know it's being done properly. And that's a massive, massive challenge we have. And again, how do we address it? Well, we have to show the value, the skill sets that we're bringing to the table, and we have to prove ourselves. So we can't just say to somebody, use us, no problem. We need to prove it, right? Why should anyone take our word for it? But the one thing we have to remember is that no stakeholder wants their product or application to have quality issues. You know, they're not the enemy. They're not wanting it to go into production or out into the market with quality issues. It doesn't do anyone any favours. So from that standpoint, there should always be buy-in for quality, i.e. testing, right? That's the way I look at it, anyway. So, how can we get stakeholders on side? How do we actually influence? Now, we can't go into any more and say you have to do this, it's mandatory. Right? We can't force people. And the more you go in, and I've seen people do this, who start to shout or start to try and bully, it doesn't work. People shut down, you know. So, and that's common psychology, right? I'm not telling you anything you don't already know. So it's not the right way to go about it. So, you know, what do we have to do? We have to build relationships and foster collaboration. And when we're talking about relationships, it's about communication, it's about people getting to know us, it's about building confidence with stakeholders, right? And that's not easy to do in a global world, actually, because we all know face-to-face always works better, right? Picking up the phone, it's harder to build relationships, but we have to continue to do that in order to gain confidence and be able to display our capability. Yeah. So it's not a case of us just sitting on the side. We have to foster relationships, and that goes for whatever level you operate at. Yeah. It doesn't matter whichever level, you will have partners that you need to be collaborating with. You need to build relationships with. You need to do the small talk on the phone so that it's a bit more pally. Oh yeah, that's my mate now. So, you know, and that works. That stuff works. The other big thing is be a partner, not a downstream supplier. Now, those of you that know me know that this is a big thing that I used to say a lot. Don't ever have a downstream supply mentality, right? You know, testing, we're not the poor cousin in the corner. And there was a time, and there still is in various places, where that did happen. I mean, I remember the first time I ever went out to India, and there was a massive, the program of work I was working on, there was a massive room of people, all developers, and there was one tester sat in the corner of the room. And he was the whipping boy, right? I mean, the developers were just all over him. And he would literally just do what the developers told him to do, really. And he was one against about 45, you know. But he operated like a downstream supplier, you know, that he wasn't a partner. And he allowed that kind of bully boy tactics to happen. And it was really from that moment on I decided, no, I think I can make a difference to this, you know, and that's got to change. And it did change, actually, quite quickly, you know. But we have to maintain that level of equality with all of our stakeholders, right? And just because we might be near the end in the process doesn't mean that we're downstream. Just because, you know, other people might perceive development to be more important, doesn't matter. We are absolute equal partners, and we need to step up to the table and act like that. Act like that. And it's about being proactive, it's about having a voice, it's about being assertive. Yeah? It's not about saying, yeah, whatever you say, big angry developer bloke. No. Having said that, don't be the enemy either, because we are in a critical profession, right? We criticise other people's work, right? So we have to make sure that we're not seen as the enemy. So, you know, there's a real balance here with our profession, particularly because of the nature of what we do. So educate people, I talked about, you know, they don't always know what testing really is, they don't really know what we're bringing to the table, etc., etc. So it's our job to educate, not anyone else's, it's our job to educate what we're about. So engage early, right? So we all know this, so I don't want to tell you how to suck eggs, but we have to engage early in our programs and our projects, absolutely where possible, be at the table at the start, all makes sense, we all know this, right? But it still doesn't happen, actually. And that we need to fix. And again, it's not about the project manager fixing that. It's about us stepping forward and saying, right, well, when you're having the kick-off meeting, we need to be there. Or we actually arrange the kick-off meeting. So again, we have got to be stepping forward and doing those things, yeah? And lastly, I suppose the other thing is don't oversell testing, right? So that's the worst thing you can do is go in and say we're going to be all things to all men. Absolutely do, everything. And then we can't deliver, right? We need to make sure we're building in reality checks as well, yeah? You can't say we're going to be able to do everything, we're going to be doing it all by next week, we're going to build this and we're going to, we have to be realistic as well, because as soon as we lose any credibility, that's when people come back to the whole question mark about testing again. Yeah, and then it takes ages to build back up that credibility with our partners. And we shouldn't have to fight as hard, actually, but the reality is we quite often do. So we just have to accept that and buy into that and do what we need to do to make it happen. Yeah? And again, when the same meeting I was having last night, as I said to this very senior stakeholder, I can't come in and perform miracles. Now I'm sure she wanted me to come in and say, oh, I can fix everything, no problem at all, don't worry, give it all to me, I'll be all fine next week. Well, actually, I know the reality is I can't make that happen. So I'm not about to go in and sell that. I said I can't perform miracles, but there are certain things I can do. Yeah? So again, we need to be careful of the message we're putting out there, I think. So some of this I've already talked about, but what do we as test professionals need to do then? So one of the key things is that we need to understand the big picture. We need to understand what's driving the decisions behind this business, this change, etc., etc. We need to understand if there's a timeline in production, why is that timeline there? It's not there just because they want to annoy testing so we don't get enough time. It's there for a reason. And it might be regulatory reporting requirements. It might be because if that trader is unable to do that trade on Monday, £5 million are lost, right? We need to understand what's driving the timelines, the budgets, etc., because we need to be part of that solution, not be moaning about, well, we don't have 6 months to test. We absolutely need to understand it. So following on from that, we need to be flexible. And again, I think, I would hold my hands up and say there have been times, I'd like to think in the distant past, where I haven't always been flexible, right? Oh, we have to do testing, and we have to do it this way, and we have to take this long, and that's it. But the reality is these days, we have to be flexible, yeah? So things like risk-based testing, so going back to what Leah was talking about, we need to apply these strategies a lot more than we do, right? A lot more than we do. We may not need to test everything. And we have to be partners in offering solutions and not trying to, or be perceived as a roadblock. And sometimes that's where we get that reputation from, is because we are too rigid. And we're not understanding the big picture. Really, really, really important. We had some, I worked on a program of work about 18 months ago, and the timelines were such that it was rigid, and we had to do a risk-based approach. If we didn't do it, there's no way we would have tested what we needed to test. So we had to do a risk-based approach and hope that the areas that we didn't test, they were low risk. Everybody was aware of it. We raised it, but we were all buying into the fact that we would go with that, right? Things like running test cycles in parallel. I mean, we've done performance testing at the same time as UAT. They don't always need to be consecutive, right? We actually did regression testing on that same project, the second round of regression testing after it got into production. Not ideal, but sometimes you have to be flexible and realistic about what is the business trying to achieve here. So demonstrate and prove that testing is adding value. So don't just talk about it, right? So, you provide your data, you provide your statistics, you provide your reports. You put together, ROI measures to demonstrate tangibly that we're adding value. Yeah, and that's, as soon as, 9 times out of 10, if you go into a stakeholder and say, here's the data, lovely, they love it, love data, right? And if they can see return on investment or value, very few people will then say no. Absolutely, very, very few. Because you're providing the real picture about what's going on and where we've been able to add value. Yeah? Again, in some cases, you can start by taking on a small piece of work and demonstrate benefits. So we did it back in Barcat, right? We'll give us this piece of work, we'll just do regression testing on it. And once, we've proven that, we've shown the data, the defects, etc., buy-in, hallelujah, have all our testing, here we go. Not interested, we don't want it anymore. And again, it's proving capability, right? It's having our stakeholders have confidence in what we do. But it's not enough just to say it. We've got to absolutely be able to prove and show the data that supports it. Providing transparency. Again, don't be a black box. That's the other thing. Sometimes testing does sit in different locations. People might not be seeing you every day. But we have to show transparency in order for people to understand what we're doing. Again, educating on testing, all of those things, right? So understand when testing may not be required. So again, we did some testing in one area at one time, and we actually realised that really no defects were being found. So we went back to the stakeholders and said, here we are, you have your head count back, there's no benefit in us doing testing. And then we just acted as an advisor for development. Because it wasn't bringing any value to the table. So why would we then, we'd give somebody a job? Well, that's not really the point, actually. So again, sometimes you need to know when actually maybe we're not adding value here. Maybe it's not worthwhile doing this, or maybe we just come in and do some advisory work as a compromise. So, it's not always about we have to do everything. Again, it's only about value. If we're adding value, great. If we're not, it's probably a waste of time or not required. Choose your battles. So one of the things I've learned is, I used to be quite gun-ho and I would fight every battle and, it has to be done this way and you have to give us this and we have to do this and, and I it felt like I was sort of waging war on the world, and every time, somebody said no, or every time, somebody wasn't buying in, it was like, go and fight that battle, right? What I have learned now is that I don't actually fight all the battles anymore, I choose them. So a classic example was a number of years ago, I was in London, I was talking to a testing team, well, why don't you put your testing out with us in Singapore? We're the test centre, we're the experts, rah-rah. And the fact of the matter was, the way that they were doing changes was a developer used to sit next to the trader, develop based on what the trader said that he needed in order to perform trades, and then a tester would sit next to the developer and test it quickly and then put it into production. Well, actually, with that kind of methodology, if you really want to call it methodology, it's probably not, it's kind of the cowboy approach, but it was being done for a reason, so the trader needed immediate changes in order to trade. There was no point in us having that testing. There was just no point. With that approach, it was never going to work, there was no value we were going to bring, and it was working the way it was working. So, really, stepped away and said, good, fine, no problem. In actual fact, I think it would have been a nightmare, but didn't tell them that, right? So, and again, I've just put a couple of graphs here, but again, it's just showing that we need to demonstrate data and return on investment in order for stakeholders to buy in, and we can't go and use bully boy tactics. Again, we don't want to be behaving like we're downstream suppliers. Yes sir, no sir, whatever you want sir. No. You know, we're equal partners. We need to step up at the beginning. We need to be at the table, and we need to be advising about our profession, not have other people tell us what to test and when to test it, right? So I had a couple of years ago a program manager in the US telling me that he wanted us to change our whole strategy about the way we were testing in a data warehouse, right? Program manager. Basically, be driven by the fact that we weren't meeting his timelines. And you know, there were lots of difficult conversations, but finally, after a lot of educating, we got through to him that, you know, the risk wasn't worth it. The way he was asking us to do it was really not going to be beneficial, and that the strategy we were applying for data warehousing, you know, was the right strategy, and here's the reasons we were doing it. And it was an exhaustive round of conversations with them. But again, we're the ones that know our profession the best. So we need to be the ones advising and educating around that. And that's my spiel.
And to think at lunchtime, Nicky had no idea she was doing it.
It's all right, Raj already owes me a bottle of champagne.
It's going up.
It will go up, yeah.
Well, Matt, here's a bottle of champagne.
Oh my gosh, no!
One for you too.
Oh, it's joking. Oh, yay, I'm glad I said yes.
Are there any questions that you'd like to put to Nicky? Surely there's one. Here we go.
Yeah, you were talking about stakeholders, but how will you influence your fellow testers? Let's say you're overseeing the entire software quality. So if you want to change from, let's say, a waterfall methodology to, let's say, Agile or Scrum, so how will you change their mindset for them to adapt to the new, let's say, methodology? So how do you influence them? They understand, let's say, ROI or?
So again, well, you could slap them, obviously. Or you could use exactly the same principles, right? Try and show people the value. Or try and get people to embrace change or try something new, right? And you can say, okay, we'll just do it for this one iteration, or we'll just do it for this one project, and then we will analyse the results at the end of it and see which way is better, right? Again, it's still just around influencing and not being confrontational and trying to show the value, demonstrate the value that it might bring. And most people, when they see something that's going to, you know, bring them benefits, most people will buy into it.
So you're saying you will first do a case study, and then after the case study, then you will have the data, and then for the next iteration, then you'll have to present.
Yeah, I mean, I would always do a pilot. You know, you can say, okay, this is a pilot. Let's just do a pilot. People are not so scared about pilots, right? Because it's not really the real thing. So let's just do a pilot and trial it and see where it goes. And then, you know, at the end of any pilot, right, there's a whole assessment done, there's a whole analysis, reports on your finding, recommendations, etc. And by then, if it's showing value, they'll buy in. Guaranteed. Yeah.
Thanks.
But you can try slapping them as well.
Anyone else? Any other questions?
Those of you that have worked with me can't ask questions.
Hi. Most of the time we talk about the functional testing, but there is another part as well, like the non-functional testing, testing the code itself is very important, the technical testing.
Yeah.
But if you see a trend, most of the companies will not have a budget for that, or else even if they have it, it's very limited budget.
Yeah.
So how do we educate about that non-functional testing and also something like performance testing, middleware testing?
So one of the things, this is actually exactly what I'm doing in my current role. Actually, it's all technical testing, specialised testing services. So let's take automation, for example. Automation, get some case studies and show the ROIs. So for a particular project like this one, we've got at least 4 graphs that show the return on investment. Most people will buy into it or find budget when they see what that data looks like. Right, so here after year 2, here's your automation costs and here's your manual. And most stakeholders that are holding the budgets will have long-term vision. Right? They might not have a budget now, but if you start to sow the seed, they might factor it in for 2014, for example. But this is a great way to get people on board with automation. Also making sure that you are using mature frameworks, reusability, portability, scalability, not reinventing the wheel. Those things are great arguments with automation. Automation is one area though we need to do a lot of education because a lot of people misunderstand it. It's a quick fix, it's going to fix all, and that's not right. So we need to, we really need to be very precise when we are discussing automation. Yeah? Performance testing. So one of the things, for example, that I'm doing at the moment, so performance testing is a big issue. Still, in my opinion, very much in infancy. It's nowhere near where it should be by now. And so one of the things I'm doing, for example, is working closely with production and looking at production data that's coming out to show us what are the problems and incidents happening in production, what are the top 10 systems, what are the type of actual issues that are happening. And I was in a meeting just this afternoon, 9 times out of 10 are performance related issues. Right? So that data can now be fed back in for me to have a conversation with stakeholders. Actually, it's costing you this much in production incidents. We really need to be doing some non-functional testing. So again, we need to be looking at that. We need to be looking at, is performance relevant? In some cases, it's actually not that relevant. In other cases, it's highly relevant, particularly in investment banking, where we've got lots of, volume, we've got batch runs, we've got all sorts of things, we've got reg requirements, we've got SLAs that have to be met, so it's absolutely critical. So it's trying to point those things out and point out what are the business, the financial, the reputational risks that you might encounter by not doing it. And usually, again, that will start to influence. I mean, you're not going to win everybody, but it will. Those type of arguments will generally win people around.
So my question is regarding ROI measures, and this probably is a broad topic, but among all the ROI measures and in your experience, which one is the best? And if there's no one best, how do you select one for your project?
You talk about automation?
We can take automation as an example.
So automation, for me, and this is really personal opinion, is the break-even point, actually. Completely, that is personal, right? I actually don't much care for the execution time difference. I'm not really that interested, but I am interested in the break-even point and then this kind of view where it shows me over time what's my cost savings. But again, every person might have a different view depending what their driver is. So for some people, time will be the driver. For other people, it will be budget will be the driver. So yeah, that's just my personal opinion. And there's lots of automation experts here who are much smarter than me and probably have a much better answer. I've done the champagne in a minute.
For automation, this ROI is pretty we can sell it easily, we can showcase that if it's a long run program and if you have multiple cycles, yes, initially you spend more, but later there's no manual effort and it's just pretty easy. But for normal manual testing, which is what we do in most of the cases, this ROI beforehand how we sell, afterwards you can calculate the ROI, you can say, okay, these many functionalities were there, these many defects we found in early SIT or UAT or and this is how we have saved money before going in production. But beforehand, like when you try to convince the project managers and all, so what are the factors you consider, like, when we try to convince?
Risk, usually risk. What's the risk of them not doing it? What are their, who are their clients? Is it internal? It's if you hone in on the risk factors, that will generally help, and that might be external risk factors or internal, right? It might be knock on to other systems, other applications. It might be regulatory. So it's about, again, it goes back to that whole thing. Understand the business, understand what they're delivering and why they're needing to deliver it, and then look at the risk involved if they don't do it. I mean, there's no one answer, right? There's,
Is it a good idea, like, just to extract some production incidents and then see, like, in similar kind of functionality how many issues were found, and then we sell that, okay, if because they didn't do or they didn't do earlier they didn't do proper testing, or also like these many issues were there and which costed so and so. If we involve, like if we do testing properly and if we cover these areas, then it's a return on investment.
You could do that. I mean, the people whose system that you're pulling out of production might be a bit annoyed, but I mean, no, I think you could do that. I just think that's quite hard to do, and that's only my experience, right? I think it's possible to do it, but whenever I've tried to get that kind of data, it's quite difficult, and then you need to get something that's really comparable with what's, the project or the program or the application, right? So, because you're kind of comparing apples and oranges, so it might work in some ways. It could be a lot of effort to try and prove it that way, but yeah, if you have good access to good data, then yes, you could do that.
One last question. Anyone?
So, what's your view on the independent testing direction that this region is taking? Because we spoke about the happiest testing job being in America, and I had the testing practice for Capgemini locally, and what I find is, unlike the North Americas and the Europes of the world, this region is totally averse to even thinking of independent testing, or they find that testing is a commodity, as you rightly mentioned, pick up anyone from the street and do the job. So what's your view on independent testing or testing centers of excellence in the region?
That's a good question. I mean, I've only just come back to the region, so I was here for 3 years, and I've been back in the UK, and now I'm literally on week 6 back in Singapore. So I'm not sure I'm a regional expert, or not currently. And I think I kind of have a different view, actually, to be honest with you. I think in Asia, testing is quite advanced and mature. When I look, say, in London, it's actually I think it's quite backward in some areas, So I kind of have a different view of Asia, I think. And obviously, maybe in the world that you're working in might be slightly different, so it's consulting, right? And yeah, so I can imagine how you might be seeing that more than probably I see it. So, I think Asia's a great place for talent. So for me, if I was ever going to set up my own testing company, which I'm not, I would probably choose Asia, because I actually think that the bulk of the talent is in Asia. And I've worked in Asia. I spent 5 years in India as well. I've done a lot of hiring in this region over the years, and I actually think this is where the talent pool is. In terms of a bigger pool. So I actually think Asia's in good shape from that perspective.
Fabulous. Okay.
Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for your time.
Look, and as I said, literally at lunchtime, Nicky wasn't expecting to be here tonight. So I really want to thank her. And I'd also like to acknowledge and thank Leah for all of her work in putting this together as well. So thank you very much. It's gone 8 o'clock. I think Nicky has volunteered to choose the card drawer, hasn't she?
Oh my God, what if I pull my own name out? You don't want me to read it, so I've got to pronounce this right. Javert Michael Solon.
Alrighty.
Lucky winner!
Thanks
Oh.
very much.
I don't know what's in it, so I hope it's congratulations. Hang on, Rohit Khanna, Barclays.
Thanks so much, guys, for joining us tonight. If you could leave your feedback form, maybe just on the desk on the way out. But there's coffees. I think there's some food to be polished off. But thanks again, and we'll be in touch around the next event. Thank you very much again.
Thank you.